I have the great privilege and the honor of actually moderating the session. I'd like to first introduce the panelists, and I'll do a quick run-through of the great panel that we have out here today. I'll start off with Peter Gartenberg, who's the president of SAP in India. Peter was earlier with Siemens, was the CEO of Siemens in India, and now with SAP in India, the president of SAP in India. Next to him is Rajiv Lal, a good friend of mine. He's the managing director and CEO of IDFC. Rajiv has an incredible career, was earlier with the Asian Development Bank, with the World Bank, Morgan Stanley, was a partner at Warburg Pincus, and now the head of IDFC in India. On his left is Carmen. I apologize, Carmen, I struggled with your last name, but is it Becquerel? Great. And Carmen is the president of Acciona in Spain. She was earlier the head of energy consulting at PricewaterhouseCoopers, was in the Spanish government for a while, and then in January 2010 took over the renewable energy division of Acciona. On her right is Mr. Tulsi Tanti, which I'm sure a lot of you know. Mr. Tulsi Tanti created and founded Suzlon, which is today the fourth largest wind energy manufacturer in the world. He's a hero of the environment by Time Magazine, and also an awardee of the Entrepreneur of the Year Award by Ernst & Young in 2006. We have Ivo de Boer, who's the Special Global Advisor for Climate Change and Sustainability at KPMG in the UK. Ivo was the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework for Convention on Climate Change and is a member of the board for Center for Clean Air Policy. He is also a professional fellow at the University of Maastricht. And finally, we have Ravi Sharma, who's the CEO of Adani Power in India. Ravi has an interesting background, was in the telecom industry for a long time at Alcatel-Lucent, was in UB Group earlier on, and now currently the CEO of Adani Power. I am Tejpreet Chopra. I used to be with GE for 15 years, and then decided after creating technology all these years to become an entrepreneur to set up a clean energy utility. What I'd like to do this afternoon is actually, before we have a question and answer session, is to open it up to all the panelists and have them spend a few minutes on giving us their perspectives on what we need to do in India to actually get energy and power to the 40% of the people in this country who don't have power today. So, Peter, can I turn it over to you, and then we'll just go through everybody on stage.
Sure. Yeah. Good afternoon. I think one of the most fundamental things is that we have to see a national strategy, a national energy strategy. And that strategy needs to include a focus on rural electrification. If you want to reach those kind of numbers, that means we have to reach out to that 2/3 of the Indian population that is not urban. So that's a key part of the strategy. There are some good indications. If you look at APDRP, this has been a very strong reform initiative. But again, mainly focused on the urban environment. There are also some very good formative activities in the area of smart grid, which we think are going to be really essential in terms of providing a far more inclusive energy policy. Obviously, from SAP, we have a strong orientation towards the area of how information technology can achieve these kind of goals. And there's a tremendous potential there of marrying a lot of the innovations that have happened in the information and technology field with the expertise that we're finding in India. So we can put those two together and really go after this challenge. Again, in that area, we think there's a huge potential in India in the area of integration. And again, that goes back again to a more national approach. This is the kind of thing we're working on in Europe, in the European Union. So there, of course, we're looking at multinational integration and leveraging and pooling of resources and power policies. But here, I think we're looking at the subcontinent, or at least India, as a first step. Again, the innovation, there's been tremendous innovation, of course, in generation. I think we'll hear about that. There's been a fair amount of innovation in transmission, distribution a little less, but the big innovation, again, is in information technology, and that's making things possible like putting microgeneration closer to consumption, thereby achieving far more efficiency and spreading those kind of resources. Information technology for managing a much wider energy mix, again, including renewables in that mix. Again, using information technology to reduce the massive losses that we have in India today. 25 to 40% are the losses that we're seeing in India. And again, that's a real strong target of information technologies today. So it goes well beyond that as well in terms of monetization of investment there. Again, information technology is allowing a lot of that to take place so that people can, both the public and private sector, can invest in that area with a high degree of predictability in terms of return on investments. One of the most fundamental places, though, I think we need to start in India is get the patient. We need to look at it from a medical analogy. We need to understand what's the patient. And again, information technology allows you to create a baseline. Where are we? What's the usage patterns? Where are the losses? What's the leakage in the system? Where do we need capacity? How do we do the kind of load balancing and getting that energy mix correct? So again, those are some pretty fundamentals that we need to do here. And then there are a number of activities and great potential for moving into the whole area of the smart grid and this kind of intelligent energy management for India.
So the question is, what does India need to do to reach out to the 360 million people who don't have access to electricity? To my mind, there are three fundamental things that we need to pursue. First is commercial viability. Second is investment in technology, or the use of technology and innovative technology. And the third is sustainability. Let me elaborate on each one of them very briefly. As far as commercial viability is concerned, there is a long-standing myth that continues to be propagated that the poor are unwilling to pay for services rendered to them. I think the evidence is very clear that, in fact, the poor and even the poorest are willing to pay for services provided they are delivered to them reliably. All the more so, each year that goes by that we have 7-8% GDP growth, the ability of people to pay is also escalating. So user cost and cost recovery in infrastructure services in this country is actually very, very feasible, especially for core infrastructure. So what we need to do in the electricity supply chain is really drive through the changes that have happened upstream already. The most important decision that was taken from a reform perspective in India's power sector was the unbundling of the electricity supply chain. So we separated generation from transmission from distribution and opened up generation to private participation. As a result of which, there's been a huge amount of investment, private investment, in generating capacity, as against existing installed capacity of 165,000 megawatts. we are expecting another 70 to 80,000 megawatts to be functioning by 2013, 2014. And of that, the bulk of it is actually private generating capacity. So that by 2014, we should have about 35%, we estimate, of total generating capacity that will actually be in private hands. That same dynamic needs to now be replicated in the transmission chain and eventually in the distribution chain. I think that the logic and the momentum of accumulated changes so far is such that that degree of opening up and private participation, both in transmission and in distribution, is only a matter of time. And we are beginning to see signs of it picking up. So in transmission, there is an open invitation now for PPP structures for investment in transmission that is beginning to pick up pace. In distribution, it's the slowest progress so far, but there are signs that it is imminent. At least that would be my bet. Second initiative that we need to drive is investment in technology or aggressive use of technology. And then there is, by that what I mean is there is absolutely no reason why we cannot conceive of a different architecture to deliver electricity to the ultimate consumer than other countries. Off-grid electricity supply is a huge opportunity for rural India and that we need to take very, very seriously. My concern is that it will be much lower cost. It is therefore much more easily scalable. Time to delivery can be faster. And the rural poor can be served much more effectively. My concern, however, is really with the psyche of legacy systems and engineering mindsets, which reflect then in government institutions, in the mindset of financiers, in the mindset of even entrepreneurs, that are forcing us through sheer momentum of the past to pursue only traditional solutions for electricity supply. And we have an opportunity, but I'm not sure what it will take for us to break new ground and think about architecture and technology in electricity supply delivery differently from in the past. Final point very quickly is on sustainability. Same sort of argument applies. We have an opportunity to reinvent the way we develop. There is no reason for our energy intensity of GDP growth to follow the same trajectory as in China. Indeed, if we follow the same trajectory as in China, it is a recipe for environmental disaster. There are lots of people in this country that grasp that, but for the same reasons as we have that are coming in the way of re-architecting off-grid electricity supply, changing mindsets so that we can find alternative solutions is proving hard. Very important beginning has been made in India through the renewables policy, the solar mission that I'm sure Carmen is going to talk about, but that needs much, much greater momentum.
Carmen, Carmen, before you start your opening remarks, can you just touch a little bit about the challenges? I know Acciona has done some off-grid, difficult projects in places like Peru. Can you touch a little bit about the more difficult projects and off-grid solutions that you provided at Acciona?
Yes, of course. Maybe just one introduction. We have just heard that India will pass from 1.6 gigawatts installed in power capacity to 8 gigawatts installed in 2013. So that means to multiply for 5 times. And to face such a challenge for the Indian government, I think it's quite an important, they have to think a lot about that. So speaking about isolated areas, it's true that we have quite a nice experience in Acciona. We work through a foundation in the north of Peru trying to provide electricity to the poorest people. You know, we have had to face several problems, which probably it will be more or less the same in the goals or in the targets that the Indian government has right now. You know, we try to provide electricity to the families just with a PV device, with a battery, and so on. So even considering that the investment could be subsidized in some way, the problem that we have to face out is how we can ensure the sustainability of this kind of devices, of this kind of supply. So we have decided to develop a social enterprise. And then the problem that we have is that to ensure the operation and maintenance and to ensure the reserve money for the battery, to change the battery in 5 or 6 years, we ask for the people around $3 per month. If we compare that with the tariff that the poorest people connected to the grid has in the country, the problem is that they pay around $1.5. So that's not fair at all. It's impossible to accept that one person with a PV system, so with 2 lamps and 1 plug for 4 hours of supply, to have $3 per month, and then people connected in the grid, just the neighbors several kilometers ago, have to pay only 1.5. So one of the challenges for the governments, I think, if they want to develop this kind of isolated supply, is just to ensure that they subsidize in the same way that they do to the people connected to the grid, and to ensure that the operation and maintenance of these kind of devices and the maintenance which suppose just to change the battery can be ensured because of this kind of subsidies. I know that here it happens more or less the same as the problem we have in Peru, and probably it's necessary to solve it if the government won't succeed with the solar mission and with another aspect of this problem. Thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. For the country like India, when the 1.2 billion populations we are, and the per capita energy consumptions, it's nearly 700 kilowatt hours are there, which is the lowest in the globally. So it's a huge need of the energy is there. No doubt we need in a times, because by 2020 also it's nearly 2.5 times need of energy is there compared to the current established base of the 160 gigawatt. So it's a great challenge and great opportunity in the country like India we have. But at the same time, the 3 important tasks is very important is there. A is to bring the energy securities for the countries, because that is the biggest risk India has. And we are extremely vulnerable in this area, so we need to focus on energy security. Second is a low carbon economy growth, so we cannot grow such a way to damage the environment and not to bring the sustainability for the globe. The third important part is this energy should be affordable for 1.2 billion populations. I think it's a great challenge for our country is there, and that's the things we have to address. So what should be the focus area is required. We need each and every source of energy. We cannot rely on the 1 or 2 source, but we have to concentrate on that, which can satisfy these 3 criteria: energy securities, the low carbon economy, and the same type affordable energy. So ultimate objective is very clear. The power sector, we have to grow in such a way, so it's bring an inclusive growth, and same time it should be a long-term sustainable economy. I think that's the important